We're beginning the Varginha, Brazil incident of January 1996 of Magic Eyes Only, Earth's Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology by Ryan S. Wood. From the research team of A.J. Genevard and Dr. Roger Lear comes the following based upon their in-depth research into a spectacular series of alleged alien body recoveries in the Varginha area of Brazil. On 20th January 1996, around 8:30 a.m., the Varginha Military Police Headquarters began to receive telephone calls from the district of Jardim André of Brazil with reports that something strange was being seen in the neighborhood. Apparently, some children had reported seeing a creature that looked half man and half animal, and that was making a sound like a sharp, anguished cry. The entity moved only when someone threw a pebble at it. The local police commanded the local police command then informed ESA Escola de Sargentos das Forças Armadas School of Sergeants of the Armed Forces in the neighboring town of Tres Coracoes that something suspicious was being sighted and reported from Jardim André. The ESA sent off a military truck with 2 soldiers and a sergeant to the scene in Varginha. About 9 p.m., the 13th Company of the Special Fire Brigade was ordered to send a garrison to the police under command of Major Marcel, Sergeant Palhares, Corporal Rubens, and Private Nivaldo and Santos. Curious civilians were gathering around but were strictly told to evacuate the area. An hour later, a creature was spotted. It was captured with a net for catching animals. It offered little resistance and was placed within a wooden box, then loaded on the ESA truck. It was put into the truck, according to the fire brigade militaries. The alien let off a faint humming sound. The military truck headed at full speed for the city of Tres Coracoes. Just prior to the capture, shots were heard by witnesses who later saw troops carrying bags with something moving inside. Later that day, around 3 p.m., the young women would turn out to be the main witness in the case. Lilian de Fatima Silva, 16, her sister Valicria Aparecida Silva, 14, and their friend Katia Xavier, 21, were walking along the pathway on their way home in the district of Jardim André, where they were startled by what appeared to be an odd-looking creature that seemed to be in great pain. The creature was crouched and leaning against the wall of a car repair shop. It had large, bulging, lidless eyes with no irises, and they seemed to be fixed on the witnesses. Its head was disproportionately large, with bumps on top and large veins on its base extending from the shoulders up the neck. Its skin seemed to be covered with a thick, shiny, wet, and oily substance. Scared as they were, the 3 witnesses ran off. Later, they were interviewed by researchers. The girls would say that the strange bumps on the creature's head resembled horns. Still on 20 January, between 6:15 and 7:30 p.m., 2 officers from the intelligence services, Marco Elicharese and Eric Lopes, probably had the most unusual experience of their military lives, one that would end up being fatal to one of them. By then, the 3 girls' story was spreading quickly. Ordered to patrol the Jardim André area after a most unusual rain that had fallen over the city, Charese and Lopes saw something move out of the shadows in a nearby construction site and crossed the path in front of their car. The officer driving the vehicle braked immediately. Both men got out. Charese saw it first. The apparent animal looked either hurt or feeble as it went into the pasture nearby. As both policemen approached the creature, they realized it was certainly not an animal. It was a person, a very different, weird, and apparently deformed person. It was naked and probably dying. In spite of the somewhat repugnant looks of the creature, they put it in their car and drove at once to a first aid station. There, the attendant was appalled at the sight of the thing and refused to let it in, recommending that it had been taken to a hospital or a zoo and concluding, "I don't want to be in trouble here." The two officers took the creature to the Hospital Regional de Minas in downtown Varginha, where vain attempts were made to keep it from dying. The hospital suddenly got crowded with police and military personnel. In an attempt to help the dying alien breathe easier, someone set it up with oxygen breathing apparatus, which was probably the cause of its accelerated death. The body was then transferred to Hospital Humanitas. Dr. Fernando Eugenio Predo, responsible for the ER patients in the Hospital Regional that day, was barred from getting in by a stranger wearing medical gloves and apron, but he saw the inert body afterwards. He would declare during a medical congress towards the end of 1996 that he could not be sure whether it was a dead extraterrestrial, but it was certainly the strangest thing he had ever seen. Unfortunately, though, when he was interviewed by the two UFO researchers investigating the case, Dr. Prado denied the truth of his statement, explaining that he said that only to put a stop to the mockery by some of his colleagues who were teasing him about the Varginha ET, because he lived in the town of Varginha and wanted everyone to stop mocking his town. On 22nd January, a military convoy headed for the School of Sergeants of the Armed Forces in the city of Tres Coracoes, carrying an awkward cargo, all sealed in heavy boxes. The next day, military vehicles rushed to Campinas in the state of Sao Paulo, going straight to Unicamp, the state university in the city of Campinas, carrying two boxes. In one box was the body already taken away from Hospital Humanitas Varginha. The other box contained something living, perhaps the creature captured earlier on the 20th by the fire corps. One of the creatures was taken to an underground laboratory in the premises of the state university. The box with two holes on each side was carried by two army men. In the days that followed, a whole staff of scientists and physicians began to virtually live in those quarters of Unicamp, among them Dr. Fortunato Badan Palares. Food was brought in at most irregular hours, including vegetables, fruit, milk, mixed soup, and yogurt. There was no contact between the employees who carried the food around and the working doctors. The food would be passed quickly through a door which was just as quickly closed. Eventually, serum was requested. On the 26th, American militaries as well as some NASA officials arrived at Unicamp. The official purpose of the visit was to discuss the possible participation of Brazilian scientists in future space missions. One of the most serious and regrettable incidents in the whole sequence of events was the death of Corporal Marco Elicharese, one of the officers from the intelligence service of the military police, who took part in the capture of the second creature on the night of 20 January 1996. Witnesses say that the officer might have died of general infection after having touched the alien, which was specified in the necropsy report. However, his death certificate presents no defined cause for his death. A witness said that at the moment of its capture, the creature made a slight movement that led the officer to touch its left arm without his gloves. On the 23rd, Chareze's father asked his son what all the nonsense people had been talking about. The rumors of the military having captured a little monster or strange being with a serious countenance. Marco Eli Cerese replied that it was no nonsense, adding that a lot was yet to be said about the affair. On the 26th, as his family watched the evening news talking about the Varichinha ET, Marco said sternly, "Do not watch that sort of thing. It's no good." On February 6th, a small tumor similar to a boil appeared on Cerese's armpit. One officer complained of severe pains in his back and was taken to the hospital. He underwent a minor surgery to have the tumor removed and was sent back home. On February 10th, Cerese complained of pains on his back and high fever. He complained about pains in his back and high fever and was sent to hospital Bon Pastor, where he was seen by a cardiologist named Dr. Rene. The doctor and his staff were unable to produce a precise diagnosis of his illness. He was transferred to Hospital Regional do Sul de Minas, where he died on February 16th of acute respiratory deficiency, septicemia, and bacterial pneumonia. Examinations prior to his death included urine tests, x-rays of his back, spine, and sacrum, and an orthopedic evaluation performed by Dr. Rogerio Lemos. A disc hernia was possible. Blood tests showed a blood count with leukocytosis, left deviation, toxic granulations of neutrophils. These are signs of a significant infection with a high capacity to toxic anemia. Not to my surprise, there were toxic granulations. Dr. Lemos said 2 antibodies were prescribed, penicillin and gentamicin. Since doctors thought that it might be a case of pneumonia due to the location of the pain or a urinary infection, HIV tests were also undertaken since it was realized that he had an immunodeficiency. A similar urinary infection or pneumonia or both would not lead a person to a septicemia condition, taking 2 antibodies. This is almost impossible, and it only occurs in the case of immunodeficiency. Despite the antibiotics, the infection was getting worse. 6 hours later, Cerese died. His body was taken for autopsy, which revealed a urinary tract infection caused by enterobacteria, confirmed by examinations at Hospital Bon Pastor. There was also a lung infection, a small pneumonia. The doctor explained that it could not have been a case of congenital immunodeficiency. Otherwise, Cerese could not have lived to the age of 23 in good health. For this reason, the immunodeficiency was surely acquired. How he acquired it, no one knows. I say the cause of death was not found because it wasn't pneumonia, nor urinary infection, nor the abscesses that killed him. We still don't know the cause. The blood count issued by the Laboratory of Clinical Analysis of Hospital Bon Pastor revealed the following information: presence of cytoplasm vacuoles, presence of fine toxic granulations in 8% of the neutrophils, little poikilocytosis. Interpreting these data, cardiologist Cesar Furtado stated that the fine toxic granulations appeared in the neutrophils of a person when he is being attacked by highly virulent bacteria. That forms a mass of combat, let's call it that could reach 50 to 60%. The report shows 8% because it was the first blood test. It already shows an infection which made us prescribe 2 antibiotics. Their presence indicated serious infection, but what led to death is yet unclear. An immunodeficiency for sure, but I assure you that no abscesses can cause an immunodeficiency. An abscess may even cause septicemia, but it can't kill a person. Besides, any antibiotics can cure it. That was not the case. It was not the bacteria penetrating the arm that caused the infection. According to Dr. Fartulo, Marco Ilacerese had a strange death without a rational explanation. In the course of my professional life, I have seen two individuals aged about 25 die of an infection, but we knew that both had immunodeficiency. Both of them, if I recall, had removal of the spleen following an accident. After a certain delay that caused immunodeficiency, in that situation, the person may decease rapidly. If he finds himself in the condition of a septicemia, but once again, this was not the case with Cerese. Not long after the strange encounters reported by Lilian Valkyria, Katia, and another civilian and military witnesses, other mysterious incidents were reported that in Varchinia that may or may not be related to E.T. from Varchinia as the creature or creatures came to be known, but which certainly bring to mind the affairs involving the capture of both beings on January 20th. On April 21st, 1996, around 9 p.m., Miss Teresintia Gallo Calef, age 65, was at a birthday party at a hall used for celebrations in a wooded area near Varchinia Zoo. She went out to smoke and suddenly glimpsed among the bushes something that nearly scared her out of her wits. It was a creature standing on a guardrail or leaning against it. She describes it as very ugly, apparently wearing a helmet on its large head, and it had bright eyes. Teresinha was frightened, went back inside and told her husband she wanted to go home. Prior to that, during the first week of April, several animals in the zoo had turned up dead for no apparent reason. Their entrails were sent to Belo Horizonte, the state's capital, for a thorough analysis, but the cause of death was not determined. Dr. Elaine Maria Santogomes, veterinarian in Belo Horizonte, stated that the findings suggested that presence of a caustic toxin. Some of the animals had a diffused hemorrhage. Nearly a month later, on May 19th at 7 p.m., Hildo Gardingo, 20, was driving to Varginha and suddenly saw, illuminated by the headlights of his car, a creature in the middle of the road that was just over 5 feet tall and was trying to run across the road from a farm. Gardingo described a creature almost identical to the one sighted by Lilian Valkyria and Katia on January 20th, except he thought he saw hairs covering the body. As the beam from the car light focused on the animal, it covered its eyes with its hand and ran back into the bushes by the side of the road. The young man was scared and drove away as fast as he could. On April 28th, a disturbing episode occurred involving two of the three girl witnesses bringing to mind the idea of an inevitable cover-up around the Varginha sightings. On that date, Luzia Helena Silva and her daughters Liliane and Valkyria were visited by 4 men who refused to identify themselves and were not wearing military uniforms. The men were ready to pay a huge amount of money to make the women go public and deny their story. If the girls had accepted, they would have had interviews on a TV channel and said what the strange visitors had coached them to say, but they refused to comply. Whether or not the military was involved in the attempted bribes is a matter of speculation. It is a fact, however, that the head department of the School of Sergeants of the Armed Forces, under the direction of General Sergio Pedro Coelho Lima, aiming to cover up evidence presented by UFO investigations starting on 10 May 1996, an internal investigation to find out who among its members were in any way linked to the events revealed about the case. General Lima also called a press conference promising everything would be explained. It was a tense and eagerly expected moment, for it could be the second time the Brazilian authorities would go public about the UFO phenomenon. The first time was in 1986 when the Minister for Aeronautics had been confirmed in a press conference that fighter planes had actually chased several unidentified flying objects over Brazilian territory. But when General Coelho Lima spoke up, he vehemently denied that his men and equipment had any involvement whatsoever with any so-called UFO sighting or retrieval, or with the capture of possible alien beings. He concluded, "We will be at your disposal here in the school to discuss anything that involves our end activity. We will be open to your inquiries." But when a TV reporter approached him later, the general refused to give an interview, saying, "Whatever I had to declare, I have just done it in my official note." The reporter pressed on, "The goal is to provide facts, isn't it?" The general replied, "I don't have to prove anything. Whatever I had to say, I've already said," then left the room. Some time after, a serious contradiction came to the surface. Major Calles, who, together with General Lima, took part in the release of the official version, appeared on a BBC video saying, "That day there was a malformed and mentally disabled dwarf who was injured by a hailstorm and wandered by Virginia, scaring residents together with his wife, another dwarf who, beside that, was pregnant and just going into labor." However, during the course of the interview, Major Calles slipped by saying that was when the army caught the creature. A further attempt at forcing the main witnesses to withdraw their story was made in early 1997. On January 18th, when Luzia Helena Silva was leaving her job as a housekeeper around 2 a.m., she was approached by two of the same men who had showed up in her house before, offering her money. The men wanted to convince her at any cost that everything was simply a joke. They did not threaten her, but were very insistent. "They tried to silence me," says Luzia, "but she still wouldn't give in to them." Later on, seeing that it was useless to waste time on her, the same men approached Luzia, Helena's employer, and tried to persuade her to convince Luzia to agree with them and deny the whole alien story. The woman, who was employed at Virginia's forum and has a bachelor's degree in law, wished to remain anonymous and does not want her name known amongst the UFO research community. Many UFO investigators and others involved in the case were threatened with mysterious phone calls made by unidentified people who had the clear intention of scaring or discouraging the researchers. In early 2003, American UFO researcher and podiatrist Roger Lear was in Virginia to gather information about the case. At that time, he talked to another physician who refused to reveal his name, but said he had assisted in the capture of the creature at Hospital Regional. According to the Brazilian doctor, the body had various kinds of injuries, but he was sure that the creature was alive at the moment it entered the hospital. He stated that when trying to examine the injuries of the creature, he suddenly felt as if my hands were automatically driven, and also that it was as if the lights in the room had suddenly changed, becoming yellowish. It also appeared to him that perception increased somehow. However, he could not fully understand the physiology of the body he was examining, although it was anthropomorphic, with a head, trunk, and limbs. The doctor did not hear any sound that might possibly have been made by the creature, nor did he mention the existence of the much-discussed thin and bifurcated tongue. Reported by other medical and military witnesses, but he confirmed seeing the being's slow movements when showing signs of life. He refused to say that the creature seemed to breathe. Researchers have dug out a somewhat controversial report of a possible UFO crash not far from Virginia that would have occurred shortly prior to the sighting and capture of the strange creatures. The first reference to the crash dates to January 13, 1996. NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, alerted Brazilian authorities about an unidentified artifact flying over the southern region of the state of Minas Gerais. It appeared to be about to crash. Glider pilot Carlos de Souza was driving on Route BR 381 connecting Sao Paulo to the city of Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, when he saw the elongated cigar-shaped flying object move about the sky at an unsteady altitude, leaving behind an apparent trail of smoke or fog. Okay. The object disappeared suddenly, and Souza assumed it had crashed. He pulled over next to a farm where the UFO had probably crashed, and he found pieces of metal-like debris that was light to the touch, and that returned to its original shape after being crumpled in the witness's hand. Similar to what was reported in the 1947 Roswell incident, the place reeked of ammonia. Subsequently, a police corporal approached Souza, accompanied by other militaries, and severely admonished him, demanding that he leave the place immediately and refrain from talking about the incident. Souza's testimony, though open to question, would help to explain the promptness in which the ESA's officers appeared on the spot to capture the alien creature in the district of Jardim Andere. A few days later, January 20th, perhaps they were informed about, even in pursuit of something unusual since the 13th, or even before that. Also on January 13th, Walter Xavier de Silva, mayor of Monsenhor Paulo, a town about 24 miles from Varginha, and his wife were driving to their farm in the neighborhood when they saw in the sky a large elongated object shaped like a train car. He would later say, with 4 lights around it, static at first, the UFO suddenly began to move, making a loud roaring noise like a powerful internal combustion engine, until it disappeared behind some hills. The sighting was immediately followed by a glare that illuminated the ground. Mayor Silva felt sick and had conjunctivitis for several days. Essentially, that is where the case stands to this day. Gevard and Lear continue their investigations. Cutting it short today.